I had to laugh when thinking about preparing for this session today. We actually had a 2-hour training program called Leading Remote Teams that we've shared with some of our clients in the past couple of years who were maybe shifting to more remote work. And so I thought as I was preparing for this that I actually just, you'll see some of the lines as you can see on my screen here today, where I just marked out the word remote, because although that's something I think we're all interested in, and probably the reason why many of you joined us today is to think about how are we going to lead teams going forward. And a lot of that is going to mean remote work. But spoiler alert, a little bit, I want to talk about some things today that are important for us to do when leading teams all the time. I think there are some specifics where we have to be more intentional when our team is remote or when parts of our team is remote. So Lexi mentioned I've owned Purple Ink for the last 10 years, and we have been a very remote organization, although we have an office as well, so people kind of come and go. And what I have found over the years, that leading teams can be easier when your team is all together or when your team is all remote. But the trickier part can be when you have a combination of people and making sure you're being very intentional to those who are not in the office. So just want to share some reminders with you about that today that might just take us back to being good leaders, right? I also think we've had a lot of information out there, and Boone County was on the forefront of having one of their earlier webinar series about working remotely. And we've seen lots of information about that in the past few weeks that has been helpful to us. But this today is really not just about us as individuals, but about us as leaders or as maybe upcoming leaders, and how we can be better leaders going forward. So this actually was a blog that Purple Ink wrote in June of 2019. So remember, before all this, and at a time when less than 25% of our workforce was working remotely, even part of the time. But for the reasons that we suggested why we should offer remote work to people. Now, I know most of us just got thrown into having remote teams now, right? We didn't have the opportunity to think about whether we could offer it or not. But a year ago, these were 4 of the reasons we said you should offer remote work. Number one, it's what your employees want. So a year ago, there was a national study done by IWG that said 82% of the US workforce liked the idea of being able to work from home or wherever they wanted. Now, interestingly, note this survey did not include working from home when your kids couldn't go to school, right? That has put us in a whole new world now that people are trying to work and have kids from home. So that survey might be changing, that people are like, get me back to work, get me out of trying to be a homeschool teacher. Thankfully for me, and my husband and I are empty nesters, so we don't have to worry about that one. That's a whole nother webinar series, I think, on how to work when your kids are at home. But number 2 was that allowing people to work from home attracts top talent. 80% of the respondents on that survey said they'd take a job that allows for flexible work. And again, that will continue to be important to us. Number 3, it increases productivity and focus. So 86% of those respondents a year ago said that they were more productive at home, which I found to be, I was very surprised that that percentage was so high, although I feel like many times I can be more productive at home. 86% is a really high percentage. Because of that, 61% of those respondents said loud colleagues are distractive. And you know, there can be lots of interruptions in our offices, or people talking, or distractions. Now, obviously we have some distractions at home, but in a different way. But number 4 was also that it is a mood booster. Of those who work remotely at least once a month, 24% are more likely to be happy and more productive. 82% of telecommuters said they have less stress. And I do, again, although we have some different issues around stress right now, think of some of the stress variables that we take away when people are working from home, like parking and driving and traffic, and having to get up and get out the door, or get kids out the door, or get dogs out the door, or whatever that might be. So I just wanted to remind you about the importance of working from of thoughts that people had on working remotely. In a separate study, they asked people, what were some of your biggest struggles with working remotely? Now, again, I'm not here today to talk about us and our struggles with working remotely, although I'm sure most of us can relate to some of these answers. The important thing I want to stress is that this is how your team members and your employees, or your peers, or even some of your leaders might be thinking as well. Interesting to me, the number one struggle with working remotely is unplugging after work, right? We'll talk a little bit about that as we go on. We'll talk about loneliness, which was a factor for 19%. 17% said collaboration and communication. I think we've all gotten a bit better about that, hopefully, or at least better in different ways than we had before. For example, just this webinar today, and having Zoom meetings, and being able to commute or connect with people via technology. But just some important points here that we have to be more aware of. Now, so I've had my own business for 10 years, and although that first answer, unplugging after work, has certainly been an issue for me personally, I was surprised to see that that was the number one response. But I'll tell you, just last Saturday when I was working, I was sending some emails to people, not expecting any answers, because that's typically what my weekend emails do. I'm getting caught up and I'm getting information out to people, but typically no one responds to me. I had more people respond to me last Saturday, I think, than I have in the past 10 years of work. Just people that, I mean, some were my team members, but some I sent some follow-up on some accounts payable invoices, or certainly people I wouldn't have anticipated that would have been working on a Saturday afternoon, that immediately responded to me about some issues. Now, the good side of that is that maybe those are people who struggled to get in 8 hours a day of interrupted time during the week, and they were making up for that, so that allowed them some more flexibility. But on the flip side, this issue of not being able to unplug after work can be a concern, that we don't get away from our work. And that can lead to burnout. So we have to be careful about that. This is a study and statistic that has been around for a long time in many different forms. Gallup has studied this issue specifically for many years, that says managers account for at least what percentage of the variance in employee engagement? The answer is 70%. 70%. So I think sometimes we think like, oh, my team is not productive working from home. My team is not staying focused. My people are doing this. My people are doing that. This person on my team would not be good at working remotely. Or this person is not a productive team member, no matter where they're working from. What I think this statistic tells me is I have to look inward. I have to start pointing fingers at me, at myself, and not pointing fingers or blaming my team members, because that if I want people to be engaged, 70% of that depends on me and not them. By the way, I should have said at the beginning, please feel free to use the chat box to ask any questions as I go along. We can take questions at the end, but I like to get questions throughout. Although when I put my slides up, I lose my chat box. So Lexi and Diana are going to monitor that chat box and interrupt me if you have a question. So feel free to chime in. So this is a listing from a survey that we had of some challenges again, when we did it a year ago, were challenges of leading remote teams. Well, I would challenge each of you to think, yes, these can be challenges of leading remote teams, but in reality, they're challenges of leading teams. It doesn't matter if they're remote or not. And yes, maybe we need to be more intentional about them when they're remote. But the number one issue is trust. Gallup asked 10,000 individuals, what leader has the most positive influence in your daily life? And then with that leader in mind, they asked respondents to list 3 words that described what the leader contributes to their own individual life. That number one answer was trust. So to me, I find it interesting when I hear leaders talk about working with remote teams or even just having a few people on the team being remote. So many times I hear them say, oh, I don't know if I trust them. I don't know if I trust them to stay focused. I don't know if I trust them to get their work done. Well, guess what? 10,000 employees don't trust, are not so sure they trust their boss, or that the most important issue for them is having trust in their boss. So that one goes both ways, right? I also find it interesting too when I talk to leaders about having teams work remotely and they refer to trust and thinking about, oh, they're going to, you know, not be as productive or do things in the middle of the day or do their laundry or whatever. I think they're making the assumption that employees who might be sitting right outside their desk are actually focused and concentrated 8 hours a day as well, right? Like, do you think those people aren't shopping on Amazon while they're right outside of your office? I don't mean to say that as I'm actually a very trustful person. So I'm not saying that in a judgmental way that I think employees cheat us on their time. What I'm saying is that I think employees will get their work done wherever they are, right? And that might mean sprinkling in some things during the day that are personal and responding to emails at night that are work related. So I think we have to give them the benefit of the doubt on those. I'm not going to walk through each of these, although we'll talk about some of these as they come up. But some of the other greatest challenges in leading teams are listed on the screen there: performance management, self-management, diversity, engagement, stress, and open communication virtually. I just really wanted to emphasize the importance of trust, though, and how we need to have that both ways: employees trusting leaders and leaders trusting employees. Of course, so many times too, we've heard this phrase, out of sight, out of mind. And too often that's how remote employees might be described, but it also might be how remote employees are feeling. They may feel that they're out of mind. Just because they're not physically present doesn't mean they should be left out of important conversations, projects, or even culture building activities. Remember, leading the teams can be difficult on both sides, and don't let those people remote feel like you're not thinking of them. Now, this was the slide that was in our original presentation. I was going to take out because I think really the purpose of the slide being in there was to talk about perceptions, and that we have perceptions. We used to have perceptions of people who worked from home who weren't taking a shower, they weren't getting dressed, they were wearing the same clothes 3 days in a row, and that their coworkers were their dogs and their cats. Now I think we can confirm that this is not just a perception, it is reality. It doesn't mean we're not productive, but I know that I'm no longer in the routine of getting up and getting dressed. And Diana and I actually laughed before we got started this morning that we actually went out on a limb today and put some blue jeans on instead of our sweatpants or stretchy pants. So you know, we're seeing lots of people's homes and lots of people's attires now that we're working on Zoom on a regular basis. And once again, we could have a whole nother webinar on that and how the importance of staying in a routine and getting up and going, but also balancing that with the comfort of not having to get up and spend extra time getting dressed, and that it doesn't always matter what we have on. We can still be very productive in our lives. So what are some ways we can avoid some of these challenges? Well, again, we could talk about lots of them, but I've included 5. Number 1 is making communication seamless. And there's so many tools out there that we're finding that we can do this on Zoom as we are on today. I've kind of, for me personally, kind of gone old with all the technology we're using. I've gone a bit old school with my teams and even many of our clients, and that I've sent more personal handwritten notes in the past 2 months than I've sent probably in the past 5 years. And so sometimes it's when Zoom becomes the norm, think about how sending a personal thank you note might seem even more special than it did before. Or picking up the phone and having a conversation with them outside of a planned meeting can be better than ever. Cultivating that social interaction. You know, thinking about how we can do things with people who are not physically with us. Maybe none of us are physically with us, or maybe some of us are together and some are not. And I'll never forget some advice I got from one of my own employees who was she not only all of my team now, although they have the ability to work remotely, they're still local. But about 5 years ago, I had someone on our team who moved away to Michigan. And so she was very remote and we were not seeing her ever. And she mentioned it how so many times we would say if we scheduled a meeting and we started using Zoom a long time ago so that she could see our face and not just be on a phone call. But how she said that maybe we'd have a meeting from 11 to 12 and then we'd turn off the Zoom meeting and the rest of us would sit together and eat lunch following the meeting. And she said, the next time we have a meeting, can you leave the Zoom on so that we can just chat and have lunch together? So I found we were very good at including her in the meetings. We weren't so good at cultivating the social interaction. And of course, now you see a lot of teams doing happy hours and just other unplanned times as well. But don't forget about the social times as well. One of my favorite authors and all-time favorite speakers is Patrick Lencioni. If you're familiar with him, I'm a big podcast fan, and he has a relatively new podcast called At the Table. And he's a consultant and has had his own company for 20 years. And he said on his podcast last week that he's learned more about his team members' families in the past 2 months than he has in the past 20 years. Because people are working from home and a kid might walk through, or you know, they might share more information about their family when their family is physically present with them. And I thought that was a really, I had to think twice about that myself, about how much I know about my own people's family, my own team members' families, and asking questions maybe at the beginning of a meeting for them to share to share some personal information about themselves. Number 3 was scheduling regular visits. Now that, depending on what your team makeup might be, whether they are local or remote, but looking for those times where you might be able to bring them in or have some face-to-face visits. Maybe helping them, especially if you have a team together and then a few people out on their own, encouraging them to be involved in their local communities, to represent your company at local job fairs, at career days, at professional organizations where they are interacting with other professionals, even though it's not maybe people on your own team. But those things can help detract from that loneliness. And then, of course, modeling that inclusive behavior, showing your employees how to treat remote colleagues so that they start to treat each other that way, that it doesn't always just come back to you as the leader and what you're doing, but having them be more inclusive for their teams as well. So once again, here's one of my slides I left to change because our question a year and a half ago was, how do you manage remote employees? Well, I changed that now. First of all, I never liked that word manage. I don't feel like we manage people, we lead them. We manage projects, we lead people. And not only how do we lead remote employees, but how are we really leading our employees, and what can we be doing differently about it? So one of the keys to that, I've mentioned in a little bit different ways, but is thinking as much as possible how we can connect them and how we can collaborate with them. And that's not only, I don't only mean connecting them with regards to each other or connecting them and collaborating with them based on conversations and communication. All of those are important. But I think for our employees, it's so important for them to be connected with the mission, with our values, with the greater purpose of the organization. And how can we make sure they understand how do they fit in, and how is what they're doing, their particular role in the organization, whether they're a salesperson or an accounts payable clerk or the president or the HR director, how is what they're doing on a daily basis connecting them to the entire organization? And how can we keep sharing that message and reminding them to do so? So Gallup, Lexi mentioned I'm a Gallup Strengths Finder coach, so I'm a huge fan of Gallup. One of their favorite quotes I've seen: we spend more of our waking hours at work than at home, and it's only natural that we want to build connections with our team members. We want work to feel worthwhile, and having trusted confidence and supporters helps foster that feeling. Now, of course, this is an interesting quote now because it says we spend more of our waking hours at work than at home, and now we're working at home. And so we're getting that connection, but we just can't over connect people too much, I don't think. Now, some people want to be connected than others, but if we want to avoid that loneliness in our people, which can lead them down a darker path, that can also lead them to be less productive, the number one thing we can do is to keep them connected with us in a myriad of different ways. We can also lead our employees with resources and technology. We can offer training to them. We can think differently about what training might look like, that it doesn't have to be a classroom style, that it can be via webinars, it can be via conversations. I really encourage you to think about measuring work by deliverables rather than activities. There's been this mindset for so long from so many people that, we need employees to work from 8 to 5, or we need them to be there at 8 and they can go home at 5, and that sort of clocking in and out mentality. And don't get me wrong, I know there's, especially with hourly employees, those measurements can be important for us to track as well. but especially in an age where, or at a time when people have kids at home, or they're trying to walk the dog in the middle of the day, which I do every single day, by the way, is to think about this concept of deliverables rather than the clocking in and out activities. What do we expect our people to do? What do we need them to accomplish in a day or in a week? And allowing them the flexibility to make that happen. Supporting a healthy work-life balance, of course, is important, and that's where we have to be careful about people unplugging, as we said, was one of the #1 concerns, and making sure they're not overworking. We have to think about people, our team members that might be in different time zones, right? Are we scheduling 8 o'clock meetings and forgetting that some of our people live in Evansville and it's only 7 a.m. at that time, or vice versa? Are we scheduling meetings at 4 o'clock and that's 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock for some of our team members who are ready to unplug and be with their families? And then there's that collaborating again with employees in communication and team activities. I do think, although I've said, I think so many of these are important for us, regardless of where your team is remote or not. One of the things I keep trying to remind myself about is that communication and interaction must be intentional. It should always be intentional wherever they are, but when they're not physically with us all the time, we have to be more intentional, or maybe create more new habits or new processes, because we're not going to run into those people just walking down the hall, or when we go to get our lunch out of the break room, or to go to the be at the water cooler. We have to be more intentional to make sure that we're having those communications and interactions. So I think another thing too, we've learned about having some people remote and some people not remote, is if you're having a Zoom meeting, for example, having every single person be at their own device, on their own device, as opposed to, say, having 5 or 10 people in a room with one Zoom hookup and then 2 people dialing in, because those people can't see the facial expressions. They can't always hear who's talking or understanding who said what. And so our team learned that one a while ago too, of the importance of, don't just have a handful of people dial into a meeting, even if you're all sitting right next to each other. Have everyone be on their own device for those Zoom meetings, so that it levels the playing field for the group as a whole. So some tips for managers is to measure the results, not the time. I mentioned that earlier about not just looking at what time do they clock in and clock out, but are they supposed to make 50 phone calls a day? Are they supposed to resolve 50 IT tickets a day? Are they supposed to prepare a training program or have billable hours, or however your organization might lead or measure results? Unfortunately, I think what a lot of organizations are finding is that the only thing they were really good at measuring was what time did people clock in and what time did people clock out, right? And that, especially for the moment, is not the most important thing we should be thinking about. It should be measuring, are they getting the results we need them to achieve? And also, are we approaching people on an individual basis? Are we thinking about that some of our team members might have pets, and some of them might have small kids, and some of them might not? Are we granting additional grace, for example, to people who have young kids at home right now that can't be in school or in daycare, And by the way, I think we should all be granting them grace. But are we giving that same grace to people who might be single with no kids, and are we expecting them to be online 8 to 5 when maybe they could stop and do an online yoga class in the middle of the day, which is something that's important to them. So approaching people individually around what their needs are and what might work best for them is likely what's going to lead best to the entire organization, right? If we can help people be successful, we all win. We all win. So what can we do to set people up for success? Well, once again, this was a slide we had prepared for a year ago that said the characteristics of a successful remote employee. Well, that one just makes me laugh now to think about it, because aren't those characteristics of successful employees? Right? Like, aren't those things we all need? It doesn't matter if we're working from home or not. We want people to be self-motivated, disciplined, have good communication skills, be responsive and tech savvy. We just have to think now, once again, when only some of our employees are remote, we might have to think differently about those things. But in the end, they're all important. I did love this quote that said, sure, working from home can have its disadvantages. I miss the office politics, the lack of freedom, and having to wear shoes. Said no one ever, right? Like, we're all, I know for me, I'm enjoying not wearing shoes. I'm ready to get back to interfacing with more people, but I'm liking wearing my yoga pants and or wearing slippers. So some of the tools, and many people have figured these types of things out already, but I wanted to put them up there, or to include them in this, because these are going to be important for us going forward again, right? Not if you're listening to this instead of watching online, the tools were a chat and collaboration tool, video calling, screen sharing, project management systems, onboarding software, and recognition and reward systems. So a lot of us have figured out those first three now, the chat tools, the video calling, and the screen sharing. But we might not be, or we might just be thinking, oh, this is all going to go away soon, so we don't need to hire anyone for the moment. We don't need to worry about onboarding, and we're way too busy to worry about recognition and rewards right now. So I think some people I've talked to have put those off, in not thinking that, you know what, I'll go back to my favorite author, Patrick Lencioni, said in his podcast a couple of weeks ago. Some people are keep thinking or keep saying, I can't wait till we get back to normal. Well, folks, I'm here to tell you, Patrick said this, these are my words now, but he said it in a different tone. What is normal, right? Or what was normal is not going to be our new normal. We are working differently. We are figuring things out. You know, some good and some bad, right? We've created some new positive habits, and we've created some new not so good habits, like snacking all day long seems to be one of my not so good habits, right? You know, so we've got our onboarding may not mean that people come to the office anymore like they used to. We may have employees that we don't ever meet before we hire them. And we may have employees who are onboarded with our organizations that we've never physically met live either. So we're getting pretty close. I want to wrap up by talking about what we call the 5 steps to success as a leader. Again, a year ago, we called this virtual success. Now I'm just calling it success. Things that we should all be doing. Number 1, creating clear goals, both for us as individuals and us as leaders. So important. My team would tell you I'm obsessed by goal setting. We talk a lot about goals on our team. And I just think it's so important for us to understand that. That might be daily, that might be weekly, that might be monthly, that might be annually. And hopefully it's all of those, right? What are our goals that we need to accomplish today? And as leaders, we should know what those goals are for each of our employees. Not that we have to create them for them every day. And some of them might be similar. It might be every day you need to make 50 phone calls. But how are we measuring the results of their effectiveness, and did they meet their goal or not? Some examples of this: I think each individual in our organization should know what are their deliverables for the next day, the next week, the next month. Do they understand their role in the organization? And this might seem like an obvious one, but I can tell you, I think there's a lot of people out there who don't understand their role in the organization, or at a minimum, they maybe don't understand the value that they bring to their organization. They should know the projects they are responsible for. Again, maybe this might seem silly, but I think sometimes people have a lot of assumptions about who's ultimately responsible for it. And it might be you, their leader or their boss, and that they're there to help or to assist, but they might not really have the communication that they're responsible for the project itself. And then who should they be contacting for specific issues, and how? And have you explained that with them? Have you shared that with them? Maybe they don't need to be waiting on you for the answer. Maybe there's another go-to person in the organization. And then along with those goals is the setting of the clear expectations. How will you check in on them with the goals? Do they need to send you an email at the end of the day to say they met their deliverables? Do you do that on a weekly basis, a monthly? I think this, we don't want to micromanage people, but sometimes there's a sense of accomplishment from people in knowing that they've met their goals for the day too. So work out with that, whatever makes sense for you. How will they connect with you for a discussion, a clarification, or a time-sensitive question? That's another thing I think I've learned even more so in the past few weeks is I've got some team members where I could just pick up the phone right now. Well, maybe I'd wait till the webinar is over, but I could just pick up the phone and call them about a question, and they'd be fine with that. Other people on my team would prefer that I send them a text or an email and said, hey, can we talk about this report at 3 o'clock this afternoon? They want to be prepared. They want to have a heads up. They want to be able to be ready for the conversation. And I'm not talking about a 1-hour meeting. I'm talking about maybe a 5-minute or 15-minute or 30-minute conversation. But understanding individually, what's the best way to connect with people? Do they like to text? Do they like to be on Zoom? And how can you work best with them in order to meet their needs? And then also, how will you assign tasks? We like to think about assigning tasks based on people's skills, energy, and time. So whether you're in the office or out of the office, the best way to decide who gets a task is based on the skills required, whether that individual will be energized by it or not. Are they using their strengths to do it? And where does this fall on the list of priorities? Do they have time to do it today? Does it need to be done this week? Or do they have flexibility around that? By the way, when I mention that energy, will the individual be energized by it? Of course, we're not in a perfect world, right? I'm doing a lot of things right now that don't necessarily always bring me energy. They still have to get done, right? We still have to do them. But I think over the course of time or a longer period of time, do we understand what our team members' strengths are and what does bring them energy so that we can be better leaders in helping assign those. We've talked about the importance of communicating often, communicating even about personal things. We used to start every one of our meetings by sharing something positive that had happened in the last week, and that could be work related or personal related. And asking people, again, when our lives are more intertwined than ever right now between our work and personal lives, don't forget to ask people those questions. Patrick Lencioni says the fear of being vulnerable with team members prevents the building of trust within the team. So sharing our vulnerable moments with our team members can be helpful as well. I talked about having them connect with the organization's goals, vision, and progress. It doesn't matter if you're remote or not, it's easy for employees to feel disconnected from the organization itself. And Gallup says that when there's a 10% increase in that connection, that can result in an 8% increase in revenue. So lots of studies, lots of research, lots of topics out there about how the more engaged our people are, the more fruitful it is for all of us. Don't forget to celebrate those wins. And sometimes those might be little wins. That might be, I put my blue jeans on today, or I didn't eat snacks this morning, to we got a new client, to we have a new opportunity, to our sales are up. Whatever those wins might be in your organization. Or here on this slide, maybe it's working from home means I can start drinking earlier. So whatever those wins might be for you, take them, right? Whatever, as long as they're productive. I mentioned some of the ways to celebrate. I mentioned earlier about I am sending a lot of personal notes. As always, we should be timely and specific with praise or recognition. You know, of course, I'm seeing a lot of our clients and a lot of my friends on social media are having these happy hour parties. We had one earlier this week at Purple Ink where not only did we have a Zoom party, but I had chips and salsa delivered to each person's house. Because I said, who wants to have a happy hour without chips and salsa, you know? They brought their own beverages, which I wasn't able to deliver to them, but I could at least share the chips and salsa with them. So that was another way. Think too about problem solving. How can you problem solve together about lots of different issues? Even if we think about problem solving specifically for how do we work best on remote teams, think of things like you don't have to assume that you have to buy a laptop or an extra monitor or technology for people to be able to work remotely. Some people will be so appreciative for the opportunity, they'll figure out their own technology needs to be able to make it work. Of course, we need to be careful about security around our documents and our conversations. But just, you know, even our everyday problems that we have as organizations, encourage people to get together to problem solve them all at once. Think too about just having a chat room open constantly. I have a friend I was talking to last week who told me that his 14-year-old son got up every day and started his school work at about 9 o'clock, and he called 5 friends every day, and they sat in their individual homes with their phones. He wasn't even holding his phone. He just had his phone sitting next to him. And as his friends were working on their homework and doing their assignments, they had the ability to talk to each other, right? Like that. I thought that was so smart, and thinking, not that we need to do that 8 hours a day, but what if we did that for an hour or two, which might be more like being in an office next to people and having the opportunity to just chat with people around us. So for some people, that might be a real win. For other people, might be like, oh, leave me alone. I like being home, so I get away from the chat. So, but again, some more creative ideas. And number 5 is for those of you who can see me, I'm sitting in our joy-powered studio, so I can't be remiss without reminding people to look for the joy in your days. Great employees are great employees wherever they work. And let's be appreciative of them. Let's be thankful of them. Let's be appreciative and thankful ourselves if we have the opportunities right now to be more remote with people. And some questions that we can ask people as we check in with them more often, or I encourage you to do. What's working? Where are you finding success? What strengths are you using more often or more intentionally? Or what are we missing? My friend Lisa Mertes, who is local and has a podcast called Handled with Care, she always talks about the question of what are we missing? And sometimes we need to ask that of our people. What have I missed as a leader? What am I not getting? What am I, what's working for you best? And how can I help support you in those efforts? Henry Nouwen once said, joy does not simply happen to us. We have to choose joy and keep choosing it every day. And certainly we've been in challenging times for all of us. We're doing things we've never done before. We're working differently. We've got teams working differently. Whether maybe you don't even have a remote team, maybe you're going to the office every day, but you're worried about spreading the virus or keeping employees safe. It's just a reminder to look for the joy in our days because it's there, and it's so easy for us to be remiss about it. I mentioned a couple times that I'm a big fan of podcasts. I did share on the screen here a specific podcast called All Things Work that is created by the Society of Human Resource Management. And they had a particularly good one on March 21st about working from home and making that the new normal, both as individuals and as leaders, and of things for us to be aware of with our people. I also might be a little remiss if I didn't give a little plug for our own Joy Powered series. Lexi mentioned that I've authored 3 books in the Joy Powered series, and then we also have a podcast called the Joy Powered Workspace Podcast, where we talk about lots of these issues, many that I've mentioned today, on how we can look for opportunities to create workspaces, whether that's at home or in the office, that are joy-powered environments for people. I do have my contact information up on the screen, and happy if you want to reach out to me directly about any questions, but also leave some time here if we have, if people have questions they want to address right now.
Hey, JoDee.
Yeah.
You probably can't see. Maybe if you hover below, the chat may come up for you. But a couple of people said they find themselves sitting more than they did in the office. And I don't know if I said that to you in a conversation. I find that too, just because right now I'm at work. I'm the only one here, but I have a stand-up desk.
Yeah.
And if I don't have a stand-up desk, I have if I'm not standing at work, I have like an exercise ball that I sit on. And so somebody asked if there's like a special cushion. And I know Carly shared that there's a cushion called Purple.
I love it.
That you can get at Bed Bath & Beyond, and it's great for sitting straight.
Yeah.
I shared that, let's see, I didn't share it yet, I guess. I was gonna hit that. It wasn't working, but anyway, I vary my I have a laptop, so I think that gives you extra opportunities to change locations for a change of scenery. But I also stand at the kitchen counter then and try to do that. Any other suggestions for folks?
Well, I would just say I really have noticed this week all of a sudden how that same thing is happening to me. Although I did mention that I walk my dogs in the middle of the day, which is so funny to me that 10 years ago I would never have dreamed of taking a break in the middle of the day. And I do think it's so important for us to think about taking a break. So I am getting up and walking around on my walk, but I too find myself working I'm sitting way too often. And I came into the office today to do this webinar, and I'm at a stand-up desk and a bar stool, so I can flip back and forth between the two. But I think it's important for us to be cognizant of that and be aware of how are we sitting, are we ergonomically, setting ourselves up, because I do a whole lot of my work from a recliner and at home. So thinking about, I love your exercise ball idea too, Diana. That was so popular a few years ago, and getting those back out again and setting differently. So
Yeah, and they actually make a one that is, here, I'll lift it up and show everyone. The ball comes up, but it actually has a back even.
Oh, nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So yeah, great idea.
I know. I think, this for me, and keep asking questions. And if you want to, we encourage people to talk to, just kind of raise your hand, either your little icon at the bottom under reactions, or, you could just raise your physical hand, and Lexi will watch out for that. But these were, for me, great takeaways. And, as a nonprofit organization, which the Chamber is, it's kind of three things. I have a very small staff, but very important. It's just Lexi and myself. And so, I need to ask her, are there specific times with it, just the two of us, we seem to kind of pick up the phone? That's me. I know she's going to answer. And, but, maybe she doesn't want me to just pick up the phone and call her. So just being intentional, with that. But
Yeah.
we also have members, which for a for-profit business, be those clients, which I know this is geared towards, teams, but really that's important too. I see a lot of this, very relevant, whether that are members of the Chamber or customers that for-profit businesses might have. But many of us have board of directors, and we maybe haven't been able to communicate with them as we normally have, and maybe feeling a little disengaged because we are a team also. So being intentional in that and keeping those line of communications and doing check-ins. So I know I already, but it's finding a time, because everybody's working, that's busy also. But maybe we just do a coffee, connection and connect with them before their work day starts. Might be better for some folks than a happy hour afterwards. So being intentional about that also. We have a lot of nonprofits, throughout our region. So hopefully some of those nonprofits are on this call and can listen to the recording, because I think all of this information is very relevant with that as being part of your team, more than just employees also.
Yeah.
Anybody else have anything before we wrap up? No, I know Carly yesterday was on our kind of our virtual happy hour, and you mentioned this, JoDee, also, which I think when you were talking about this today, I remember Carly saying, she has children, and just some positives that have come out of working remotely are just that time that has been, driving to the office, picking up kids from school or daycare, and then having to do everything else at home, that maybe, you know, she's can take care of her animals, you know, on a break throughout the day. So I think as a leader, giving grace to our teams to be able to take, you know, those breaks throughout the day, even if they are an hourly employee. That was my, you know, great takeaway, you know, recognizing what it has been accomplished and not just an hourly through that. So
Yeah.
give yourself some grace and take a little time for that. Carly's raising her real hand. Go ahead, Carly.
So we as a credit union have switched to, I don't know if you can hear me well, my headset was acting up a little bit ago.
Yeah.
But we switched to virtual, and it's a transition that we are hoping to stay actually permanent. We're going to be the first credit union in the United States to be 100% virtual as long as we can stay virtual. A lot of the other institutions are making that slow transition to opening back up fully and making those changes and stuff. And we're a small company. We're 14 people strong. And I mean, that is brand new to the CEO. We are 14. And so our little small credit union we're starting to see like the ups and downs of working remotely, and some people are struggling being able to do it, and some people are really, really confident in it.
Yeah.
And something that we don't all have time to be able to like sit down and relax. We're all doing multiple things. We call it just wearing multiple hats. Unfortunately, some of us look like a hat rack right now, but it is what it is, myself included. But it's one of those things that I think that we struggle with often is we feel like we're very overloaded. You know, you only have so many hours in the day. You can't really work the overtime, but being home makes it seem like, oh yeah, I'm not driving anywhere. I don't have to go pick up my kid by a certain time. I'm not obligated as far as schedules are concerned to really push as hard to get home. You know what I mean? With me already being home, I ended up working until like 9:30 last night. And being in the office, I couldn't do that before. There was no way I could do that. I have kids running around and everything else.
Right.
So something that I think has been hard for us that, I mean, I don't know if you have any useful knowledge. I would assume that you do. Is being able to figure out kind of how to maximize that time and to have that healthy balance, because you can't ignore the kids all day, but you can't take so much time with them that you're taking away from your work hours. You know what I mean? So much is already crunched in there, I feel.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's no magic answer to that on what works, but you know, if nothing else, maybe tracking your time, if you're not used to doing that already, that it might be that at 9:30 at night you feel like, oh my gosh, I've worked all day, but maybe you really have only committed to 6 hours for the credit union, right? And so are you providing enough value to the organization, or did you work 14 hours? And now, you know, I also talked about the difference about it's not just about clocking hours, it's about what value have you provided. Have you accomplished the same amount of work in lesser time, or vice versa? So I think that is something for each of us to have to figure out. And of course, what's even harder is for us as leaders to help our team members figure that out. And that's why I think it's so important to have those daily goals, those daily expectations. And maybe they're not all just daily, but weekly expectations. Maybe I worked a long day on Monday, but Tuesday I needed to, you know, spend more time outside or with my kids or whatever. So by the balance of the week, I'm coming out. But I'd say focus on deliverables, not on just what time it is. So.
Okay. Thank you.
Well, thank you, JoDee. Thank you for everyone, you know, for participating today and either calling in or logging in. Please share. Lexi will share this recording. So we encourage you to share it. Share it with your team. You know, share it with your leaders. Share it with your boards. I think it's very applicable information that we all, it's a refresher to hear that we can put into practice. I think that's the best, is when, you know, there's takeaways that you can put into practice and really utilize. So thank you, JoDee, for sharing your expertise with us, for being a great Boone County Chamber member, and tell all of your team hello from us.
All right.
And that we're thinking of all of you too, and hope to see you in person soon.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, finish those deliverables and then call it a day.
There you go. All right.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.